Today we gather to discuss the situation unfolding in Burkina Faso, a landlocked country in West Africa which has been facing significant challenges in recent years. From the rise of insecurity to shifts in political leadership, Burkina Faso's situation has captured global attention. As we look at the current state of affairs, we recognize that a complex set of factors has contributed to the instability and difficulties the country now faces. First and foremost, Burkina Faso, like several of its neighbors in the Sahel region, has been severely affected by violent extremism. Armed groups affiliated with terrorist organizations have made their presence known, particularly in the northern and eastern regions. This has led to countless deaths, displacement of civilians, and the disruption of local economies and infrastructures. The government and the people have found themselves in a constant struggle to regain control of territories and provide basic services. This situation has escalated tensions and caused significant economic hardship. Many families have been forced to flee their homes, seeking refuge in urban centers or across borders, creating a humanitarian crisis. The ripple effect of these security challenges is not limited to violence alone. The displacement of millions has put immense pressure on neighboring countries, as well as on internal resources. Basic services such as education, healthcare, and access to clean water are more limited than ever. The number of internally displaced persons is staggering, and the international community must step in to offer assistance. At the same time, access to food has been severely restricted. The ongoing conflict and insecurity have disrupted farming activities, leading to food shortages and exacerbating poverty. Malnutrition rates are climbing, especially among children, and medical aid remains insufficient to meet the growing demand. Burkina Faso's political landscape has also been marked by instability, with several changes in leadership and a growing sense of discontent among the population. The country has seen various factions vying for control. Political solutions to the crisis remain elusive, and the country has been undergoing multiple transitions, including military-led leadership, following the collapse of previous governments. In such an environment, it is difficult for long-term peace and stability to take root. The people of Burkina Faso are yearning for a strong, unifying government capable of addressing the security, economic, and humanitarian challenges that they face. Burkina Faso is not isolated in its fight against extremism and instability. The international community, including regional organizations such as the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, the African Union, AU, and various United Nations agencies, has been actively involved in supporting efforts to restore peace and security. However, solutions are never simple. Military interventions alone cannot address the underlying issues that fuel violence in the Sahel. A holistic approach, which includes dialogue, community involvement, and support for regional cooperation, is essential for lasting peace. The path ahead for Burkina Faso will not be easy, but it is not without hope. The resilience of the people, their desire for peace, and their ability to adapt to adversity can be the foundation for rebuilding their country. It is critical that Burkina Faso's leadership, regardless of who holds power, remains committed to the principles of justice, human rights, and the well-being of its citizens. Ultimately, the international community must continue to provide the necessary support. This includes humanitarian aid, security assistance, and economic aid to ensure that Burkina Faso can navigate its challenges and build a better future for its people. In conclusion, Burkina Faso's situation is complex, shaped by a mixture of security, humanitarian, and political challenges. But with cooperation, support, and a commitment to peace, the country can overcome these hurdles. Let us stand in solidarity with the people of Burkina Faso as they continue their journey toward peace, stability, and prosperity. Burkina Faso is currently facing one of the most challenging crises in its history, largely due to the rapid escalation of violent extremism. The situation, particularly in the northern and eastern parts of the country, has resulted in widespread violence and insecurity. This extremism, primarily driven by armed groups linked to global terrorist organizations such as Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, has infiltrated the region with alarming speed, destabilizing communities and displacing millions. For several years, the government and the people of Burkina Faso have struggled to contain the growing threat of these extremist groups, who seek to establish control over vast swaths of territory. The violence has been far-reaching, targeting not just military forces, but also innocent civilians, local communities, and even humanitarian workers attempting to deliver aid. These groups have employed a variety of violent tactics, including bombings, ambushes, and massacres, creating an atmosphere of fear and mistrust among the population. The impacts of this security crisis extend beyond the immediate loss of life. It has also strained the country's infrastructure, disrupted agriculture, and stunted economic growth. Areas once known for thriving agriculture are now abandoned, with farmers too afraid to tend to their crops for fear of attacks. Markets have been destroyed and vital transportation routes have been cut off, leaving people isolated and without access to basic goods. As a result, communities that were once self-sustaining now face severe shortages of food, clean water, and medical supplies. The impact of the violence on civilians has been devastating. Reports of atrocities, including massacres of entire villages, have shocked the international community. Women and children in particular have borne the brunt of the violence, with many being kidnapped, raped, or recruited by armed groups as child soldiers. This ongoing insecurity has also severely disrupted education, with hundreds of schools closing across the affected regions. In some areas, classrooms have become targets for attacks, further undermining the country's future prospects and limiting opportunities for the younger generation. The government, already dealing with limited resources, has struggled to provide adequate security in the face of such a complex and widespread threat. Military forces, although courageous, have been unable to completely contain the spread of extremism. The presence of armed groups is not confined to the borders of Burkina Faso alone, but spills over into neighboring countries such as Mali and Niger. This regional dimension has further complicated the efforts to address the issue, as security forces are stretched thin across vast, often remote territories. The conflict in Burkina Faso is also driven by a complex web of political, social, and economic factors. Long-standing grievances over governance, corruption, and marginalization of certain ethnic groups have made some communities more vulnerable to radicalization. Poverty, lack of opportunity, and disenfranchisement contribute to the environment in which extremist groups find fertile ground for recruitment. These groups prey on young people, offering them an ideology and a sense of belonging that they may feel is lacking in their everyday lives. Furthermore, the rise of extremism in Burkina Faso is not an isolated event, but part of a broader regional phenomenon in the Sahel. Neighboring Mali and Niger have similarly faced attacks from extremist groups, and the porous borders between these countries make it easy for militant organizations to operate across national lines. This has turned the entire Sahel region into a hotspot for terrorism and violent extremism, with Burkina Faso being one of the most heavily impacted nations. The government's response to this escalating security crisis has involved a combination of military operations and international partnerships. Burkina Faso has received support from regional forces, including those from neighboring countries and the broader Sahel region, as well as from international bodies like the United Nations. However, despite the best efforts of both local and foreign military personnel, the insurgency continues to grow, and many areas remain beyond government control. One of the primary challenges in addressing this violence is the lack of a unified approach to countering extremism. The military strategies employed thus far have focused heavily on direct confrontation with armed groups, yet this has not been sufficient to address the root causes of radicalization and insecurity. There is a growing recognition that a military-only solution will not bring lasting peace to Burkina Faso. Instead, a more comprehensive approach is required, one that includes addressing the underlying socioeconomic issues, promoting political stability, and fostering dialogue between communities and the government. International aid and humanitarian support have also been essential, as they help mitigate the immediate suffering caused by the conflict. However, humanitarian efforts alone cannot resolve the larger security crisis. International donors, including the European Union, the United States, and various UN agencies, have pledged millions in aid, but the situation is dire, and the need for assistance continues to grow. Moreover, the worsening security situation has made it increasingly difficult for humanitarian workers to access affected areas, further complicating relief efforts. The impact of the escalating violence is not just felt within Burkina Faso, but has ripple effects across the entire region. As Burkina Faso struggles with its own security challenges, the entire Sahel region remains unstable. The threat of extremist violence has led to an increase in refugee movements, putting pressure on neighboring countries like Mali, Niger, and even Ghana. Furthermore, the region's instability has created fertile ground for organized crime and illegal activities such as human trafficking, arms smuggling, and drug trafficking, further complicating the security environment. In conclusion, the escalating security crisis in Burkina Faso is a direct result of the rise of violent extremism, which has destabilized the northern and eastern regions of the country. The violence, which affects both civilians and military personnel, has crippled the economy, displaced millions, and created an enduring humanitarian crisis. Despite efforts to address the threat, the government and its international partners face an uphill battle in restoring peace and security. It is clear that a multifaceted approach, combining military, political, and social strategies, will be necessary to address the root causes of extremism and rebuild the country's future. The ongoing conflict in Burkina Faso has given rise to one of the most severe humanitarian crises in recent history, with a massive displacement of people both within the country and across its borders. Millions of Burkinabe citizens have been forced to abandon their homes, livelihoods, and communities in search of safety. This displacement, caused by escalating violence, has created an urgent and overwhelming need for humanitarian assistance, including food, shelter, clean water, and medical care. The scope and scale of the crisis are staggering, and the international community is struggling to keep up with the ever-increasing demand for help. Internally displaced persons, IDPs, within Burkina Faso are facing unimaginable hardship. As extremist groups have intensified their attacks on civilian populations, families have fled their homes, leaving behind everything they once knew. In many cases, these families have had no choice but to abandon their homes and land, which were the foundation of their livelihood. Entire communities have been uprooted, creating informal settlements in urban areas that are ill-equipped to handle the sudden influx of people. These displaced people often find themselves living in overcrowded conditions with little access to basic services. Temporary shelters made of flimsy materials provide scant protection against the harsh weather, leaving individuals vulnerable to the elements. With inadequate sanitation facilities and limited access to clean water, the risk of disease outbreaks is high. Cholera, malaria, and other waterborne diseases spread rapidly in such environments, making the situation even more perilous for those already traumatized by violence. The impact of displacement is particularly severe for women and children who are disproportionately affected by the ongoing crisis. Women face heightened risks of sexual violence, exploitation, and trafficking, while children are often separated from their families or deprived of education. The loss of family members due to violence or separation is devastating, and the disruption of educational opportunities creates a lost generation of young people, further compounding the country's challenges in the years to come. Many children are being forced to grow up in conditions of extreme uncertainty, without access to the resources they need to build a better future. In addition to the displacement within the country, a significant number of Burkinabe citizens have sought refuge in neighboring countries, further straining regional resources. Countries like Mali, Niger, and Ghana are grappling with the influx of refugees, many of whom have fled to escape the violence in Burkina Faso. These neighboring countries are already dealing with their own security challenges and humanitarian issues, and the sudden arrival of refugees adds to the pressure on their social services, healthcare systems, and infrastructure. The situation has created a regional crisis that requires coordinated efforts from both national governments and the international community. The sheer scale of the displacement crisis is overwhelming. According to the United Nations, more than 2 million people have been displaced within Burkina Faso, and over 1 million have fled to neighboring countries. These numbers continue to rise as the violence persists. As a result, humanitarian organizations are struggling to meet the basic needs of displaced populations. Resources are stretched thin, and the security situation often makes it difficult for aid workers to reach those in need. In some areas, access is virtually impossible due to the presence of armed groups, and aid convoys are often targeted or forced to turn back. Despite the challenges, local and international humanitarian organizations are working tirelessly to provide relief. Agencies such as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, the World Food Programme, WFP, and Médecins Sans Frontières, MSF, are providing food, medical care, and other essential services to displaced people. However, the response has not been sufficient to meet the growing needs. In many cases, the aid provided is inadequate and sporadic, with some areas remaining underserved for extended periods due to logistical and security constraints. Food insecurity is one of the most pressing issues faced by displaced populations. As conflict has disrupted agricultural production and market access, many displaced families are reliant on humanitarian food aid to survive. However, with supply lines disrupted and aid delivery complicated by insecurity, food scarcity remains a serious concern. The situation is especially dire in rural areas, where farming is the primary means of subsistence and displacement has left people unable to produce or purchase food. Malnutrition, particularly among children, is on the rise, and the risk of famine looms large if the conflict continues to deepen. Access to healthcare is also a critical issue for displaced persons. The influx of people into overcrowded areas has stretched already limited healthcare facilities to their breaking point. Many displaced people are living in areas where medical supplies are scarce and healthcare workers are often in short supply. The lack of adequate medical infrastructure, combined with the constant threat of disease outbreaks, has created a perfect storm for public health emergencies. In addition, mental health issues related to the trauma of displacement, violence, and loss are widespread, yet mental health services are sorely lacking. The international community's response, though vital, has been insufficient to meet the scale of the crisis. Donors have pledged significant amounts of aid, but the political and logistical challenges of providing effective assistance in a conflict zone have hampered efforts. Humanitarian agencies are facing significant difficulties in accessing the most affected areas, and many are forced to scale back their operations due to the security risks involved. The lack of a comprehensive peace strategy, coupled with the complexity of the conflict, has made it difficult to resolve the underlying issues contributing to the displacement. In addition to the physical and material challenges, the psychological toll on displaced people cannot be overstated. Many have lost family members, homes, and their sense of security. The trauma of fleeing violence, living in precarious conditions, and witnessing the destruction of their communities is profound. For many, the future is uncertain, and hope for a return to normalcy seems distant. This psychological burden will have long-term consequences for both the individuals affected and the broader society in Burkina Faso. In conclusion, the mass displacement caused by the conflict in Burkina Faso has resulted in a humanitarian crisis of immense proportions. The millions of people forced to flee their homes are in desperate need of assistance, including food, shelter, medical care, and psychological support. While international aid has been critical, it has not been sufficient to address the full scope of the crisis, and the security situation continues to impede relief efforts. As the conflict persists, the displacement and suffering of Burkina Faso's population are likely to continue, with the need for a comprehensive and sustained international response becoming increasingly urgent. The ongoing violence in Burkina Faso has had a devastating impact on the country's economy, particularly on agriculture, which has traditionally been the backbone of the nation's livelihood. The conflict, now spanning several years, has disrupted the agricultural cycle and devastated local markets, leading to severe food shortages that affect millions of people. With large areas of the country rendered unsafe due to the violence, farmers have been unable to plant, cultivate, and harvest crops, leading to reduced food production and limited access to essential goods. As a result, food insecurity has reached alarming levels, particularly in rural areas, where agriculture is the primary source of income and sustenance for families. One of the most visible consequences of this economic disruption is the decline in agricultural output. In a country where over 70% of the population relies on farming for their livelihood, the conflict has effectively put a halt to the agricultural activities that once sustained the nation. Farmers are unable to access their fields due to the insecurity, and even when they can work, the constant threat of violence makes it difficult to plant and harvest crops with any degree of certainty. As a result, staple crops such as maize, millet, sorghum, and rice have seen production levels drop dramatically. This has created widespread shortages of these vital food sources, which are not only essential for the nutritional well-being of the population, but also form the basis of local markets. Furthermore, the insecurity has disrupted trade routes, which are vital for the movement of goods between regions. In many areas, roads have become impassable due to the presence of armed groups or the destruction of infrastructure. This has further exacerbated the shortage of food and other essential commodities, as transport of goods has been severely limited. For example, merchants are unable to transport food from farming regions to urban centers, and rural populations can no longer access food markets. As a result, food prices have soared, making it even more difficult for families to afford basic staples. In some cases, entire market systems have collapsed, and people are forced to rely on whatever resources they can gather from local communities or international aid, which is often insufficient. The combined effects of disrupted agriculture and trade have also led to a dramatic rise in food prices, pushing many households into a state of extreme vulnerability. Families who were once self-sufficient are now forced to rely on external sources of food aid. However, the scale of the displacement and the destruction of local economies means that aid alone is not enough to meet the growing demand. In the absence of sufficient food assistance, people are resorting to desperate measures. Many families have been forced to reduce their food intake or to consume cheaper, less nutritious alternatives. Others have turned to survival strategies such as selling off valuable assets, including livestock, to buy food. These coping mechanisms, while essential in the short term, only exacerbate the long-term economic hardships for the population, particularly for those already struggling with poverty. The widespread food insecurity has taken a heavy toll on the health of the population, particularly children, who are the most vulnerable. Malnutrition rates, which were already a concern prior to the conflict, have skyrocketed in recent years. Children in particular are facing severe malnutrition, which can have long-term consequences for their physical and cognitive development. The lack of access to adequate food, combined with limited healthcare resources, has made it difficult to address the nutritional needs of the population. Malnutrition among children not only contributes to higher mortality rates, but also has a profound impact on education, as children are too weak to attend school or concentrate on learning. And that's important because the amount of labor who lost their jobs might have been larger than the losses lost from COVID-19. The situation is further complicated by the lack of access to healthcare services in conflict-affected areas. Many health centers have been either destroyed or rendered non-functional due to the violence, and healthcare workers are unable to reach remote areas due to security concerns. As a result, conditions such as malnutrition, diarrhea, and respiratory infections, which are exacerbated by inadequate nutrition, are going untreated. When we ask many people, the lack of medical supplies and trained personnel has made it increasingly difficult to manage these health issues, further compounding the suffering of the population. In addition to food insecurity, the economic disruption has led to widespread unemployment and poverty. The destruction of agricultural lands and markets, combined with the inability to access secure employment, has left many individuals without a source of income. Rural households, which were once able to rely on farming or small-scale trading, are now faced with the prospect of losing their livelihoods entirely. Urban areas, which were previously seen as hubs of economic activity, have also been affected as local businesses struggle to survive amid the ongoing insecurity. This has led to a significant rise in poverty levels, with many families falling into deeper financial distress as they lose access to their traditional means of survival. Displacement of large numbers of people within the country and across borders has further intensified the economic challenges. Refugees and internally displaced persons, IDPs, are often living in overcrowded conditions with limited access to economic opportunities. In many cases, they are forced to rely on humanitarian aid to meet their basic needs, further straining the resources of host communities and governments. The influx of displaced persons into urban areas has also placed additional pressure on already stretched infrastructure and public services, including education, healthcare, and housing. Baruel is perfectly capable of handling tourism. Turns out it remains tiresome, difficult, and expensive, and so it's wide enough, rich. International aid efforts have played a crucial role in alleviating some of the suffering caused by food insecurity, but the scale of the crisis has made it difficult to provide sufficient assistance. Humanitarian organizations such as the World Food Programme, WFP, and UNICEF have been working to provide food aid, nutrition programs, and health support, but these efforts are often hindered by the ongoing conflict, which makes it difficult to deliver aid to the most affected areas. The lack of a comprehensive peace agreement or resolution to the conflict has also made it difficult to stabilize the economy and restore agricultural production. Ultimately, the economic disruption and food insecurity in Burkina Faso are intertwined with the broader security crisis. Without a resolution to the violence, it is unlikely that agricultural production and trade will return to normal levels anytime soon. The economic challenges are compounded by the ongoing displacement of people, the destruction of livelihoods, and the inability to access basic services. As the conflict continues, the potential for a prolonged food crisis remains high, and millions of people are at risk of falling into deeper poverty and malnutrition. The international community must continue to provide support, but long-term solutions will require a sustained peace effort and a focus on rebuilding the agricultural sector, restoring trade routes, and improving access to education and health care. Burkina Faso's political landscape has been marked by a series of rapid changes in leadership, contributing significantly to the ongoing instability that the country is currently facing. Over the past decade, the nation has witnessed multiple shifts in power, with military takeovers replacing civilian governments in an environment of widespread dissatisfaction, economic challenges, and growing security concerns. These abrupt changes in leadership have made it difficult to establish a cohesive, stable government capable of addressing the many issues that Burkina Faso faces, including national security, governance challenges, and economic development. The uncertainty surrounding political leadership has only deepened the country's crisis, leaving the population in a constant state of fear and instability. Burkina Faso's political instability can be traced back to the fall of the longtime President Blaise Compaoré in 2014, after 27 years in power. His departure came after mass protests against his attempt to amend the constitution and extend his rule. His ousting was initially seen as a positive sign of the country's democratic evolution, with hopes for greater political reform and accountability. However, the country quickly descended into chaos, with protests and unrest becoming common features of the political landscape. Despite the promise of a new democratic direction, Burkina Faso was unable to stabilize its political environment, and the security situation worsened as extremist groups gained ground in the northern and eastern parts of the country. In 2015, a failed coup attempt by members of the Presidential Guard further exacerbated political uncertainty. The attempt, which sought to reinstall Compaoré or his allies in power, was crushed, but left the country deeply divided and politically fragile. Although democratic elections were held in 2015, they did little to restore the political stability that many had hoped for. The newly elected government, led by President Roch-Marc Christian Kabore, struggled to balance the demands of security, economic development, and political reform while dealing with the growing threat of extremism in the region. As the violence escalated, public faith in the government's ability to deliver security and stability eroded, creating fertile ground for further unrest. In 2020, after increasing frustration with the government's handling of the security crisis, a new wave of protest broke out, demanding stronger action against the insurgency. The government's inability to effectively respond to the rising violence and insecurity, along with widespread corruption and inefficiency, led to mounting dissatisfaction among the population. In January 2022, a group of military officers, led by Lieutenant Colonel Paul-Henri Sandaogo Damiba, staged a coup, overthrowing President Kabore and citing the government's failure to protect the country from extremist violence as the primary reason for the takeover. This military intervention marked the third coup in less than a decade, underscoring the lack of stability and governance in Burkina Faso. While the coup was initially welcomed by some segments of the population who were frustrated with the previous government's inability to address the security situation, it also raised significant concerns about the future of democracy in Burkina Faso. Military takeovers are often seen as a step backward in a country that has struggled to establish democratic norms. The overthrow of Kabore was a stark reminder that Burkina Faso's political system remains fragile and susceptible to instability. Following the coup, Damiba promised to restore security, but the situation has only deteriorated further. As of 2023, extremist groups continue to wreak havoc across the country, and the military government has yet to bring about the peace and stability that it promised. One of the key challenges facing Burkina Faso is the difficulty in establishing a cohesive and effective government. The frequent changes in leadership have meant that the country has not had enough time to develop strong, functioning institutions that can address the complex problems it faces. The military governments that have come to power in recent years have struggled to maintain control over the entire country, with large parts of the north and east falling into the hands of extremist groups. These areas are outside the effective reach of the state, and governance structures have collapsed, leading to a lack of public services and essential infrastructure. Wallets deliver currency and banking services, but not necessarily infrastructure. In addition to the collapse of state control in certain regions, corruption within the government has been a major impediment to effective governance. Despite efforts to curb corruption, the perception of government inefficiency and a lack of transparency has been widespread. Public resources intended for development and security have often been misappropriated, further eroding trust in the political system. This corruption, coupled with weak governance structures, has made it incredibly difficult to address the root causes of Burkina Faso's political instability. Moreover, the frequent changes in leadership have left the country without a clear long-term vision for its future. Each new government or military regime has come with its own set of priorities, often changing direction from the previous administration. This lack of continuity and a unified vision for the country's future has contributed to the sense of uncertainty that pervades the political environment. This uncertainty has made it difficult for both domestic and international actors to engage with the government in a meaningful way, as the political landscape remains in flux. The growing insecurity has further complicated efforts to build a functional government. The government, whether civilian or military, has been forced to focus almost exclusively on addressing the security crisis, often at the expense of other vital governance issues such as education, healthcare, and economic development. As the military has become more entrenched in governance, there is a growing concern that Burkina Faso could experience further authoritarian rule, which could undermine the country's already fragile democratic institutions. In addition to the challenges within the government, the political instability has also weakened the relationship between the state and its citizens. Trust in the government has eroded, and the population is increasingly disillusioned with the political process. With a lack of effective leadership and security, many Burkinabe citizens have lost faith in the ability of the government to deliver on its promises. This lack of trust has further contributed to the rise of radicalization, as frustrated young people look for alternatives outside the traditional political system. In conclusion, the political instability and governance challenges in Burkina Faso are deeply intertwined with the ongoing security crisis. Frequent changes in leadership, including multiple military takeovers, have made it difficult for the country to establish a cohesive and functioning government capable of addressing the complex issues it faces. The country's political system remains fragile, and efforts to build strong democratic institutions have been stunted by corruption, inefficiency, and a lack of continuity. The inability to address both the immediate security challenges and the broader governance issues has left Burkina Faso in a prolonged state of instability, with the future of its political landscape uncertain. The path to lasting peace and stability will require not only a resolution to the security crisis, but also a concerted effort to build a more transparent, accountable, and cohesive government. The international community has played a significant role in supporting Burkina Faso as it grapples with the devastating consequences of violent extremism and political instability. International organizations, including the United Nations, EU, the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the African Union, AU, have actively engaged in peacekeeping efforts, providing crucial humanitarian aid, diplomatic support, and, in some cases, military assistance. However, while these efforts have been important, they have not been sufficient to resolve the underlying causes of the country's instability. More comprehensive and collaborative solutions involving not only international stakeholders, but also regional cooperation and political dialogue are essential for addressing the root causes of the conflict and ensuring long-term peace and stability. The UN has been at the forefront of peacekeeping and humanitarian assistance in Burkina Faso, working through various agencies such as the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, and the World Food Programme, WFP. These agencies have been instrumental in providing vital support to displaced populations, delivering food, water, medical aid, and shelter to millions of people affected by the violence. The UN has also been involved in advocating for the protection of civilians, pushing for a cessation of hostilities and promoting human rights in the face of escalating violence. While these efforts are commendable, the ongoing violence and the inability to reach large parts of the country have hampered the effectiveness of these interventions. The presence of armed groups, as well as the volatile security situation, has made it difficult for aid organizations to deliver help to all areas in need. Additionally, the absence of a sustainable political solution has undermined efforts to address the conflict at its root, leaving the international community in a reactive rather than proactive position. ECOWAS, as a regional body responsible for maintaining peace and security in West Africa, has also taken steps to assist Burkina Faso. The organization has deployed diplomatic missions and mediators to engage with the Burkinabe government and other regional actors in a bid to reduce tensions and promote dialogue. In response to the 2022 military coup, ECOWAS initially imposed sanctions on Burkina Faso and called for a swift return to constitutional rule. However, like the UN, ECOWAS's efforts have often been limited by the complexities of the situation on the ground. While the organization has exerted pressure on the military government to restore democratic processes, the situation has continued to deteriorate, with regional diplomatic interventions proving insufficient to halt the country's slide into deeper instability. ECOWAS has struggled to find a balance between supporting Burkina Faso's sovereignty and holding its leadership accountable, while also addressing the broader security challenges posed by armed extremist groups. The African Union similarly has offered both diplomatic and peacekeeping support to Burkina Faso, underscoring the need for a collaborative approach to regional security. The AU has consistently emphasized the importance of African solutions to African problems. advocating for an African-led approach to peace and stability. While the AU has condemned human rights violations and called for an inclusive political dialogue, its efforts have been limited by the lack of a coherent regional strategy to address the root causes of extremism and instability in the Sahel region. The African Union's capacity to intervene effectively in Burkina Faso has been constrained by a number of factors, including the lack of resources, political will, and coordination among regional actors. Moreover, the AU's efforts to promote political dialogue and reconciliation have been undermined by the fragmented political landscape and the ongoing military control of the country. While international organizations have been critical in providing humanitarian aid and facilitating diplomatic engagement, it has become increasingly clear that the situation in Burkina Faso requires more than just external intervention. A truly effective solution to the crisis must involve strong regional cooperation and a concerted effort to address the underlying causes of the conflict. This means not only focusing on military and humanitarian responses, but also creating pathways for meaningful political dialogue, governance reform, and development. Regional cooperation is crucial to addressing the security challenges facing Burkina Faso, especially given the transnational nature of the conflict. Extremist groups in Burkina Faso are not operating in isolation. They are part of a broader insurgency that spans several countries in the Sahel region, including Mali, Niger, and Chad. These groups, often linked to global jihadist movements, exploit porous borders and weak states to expand their influence, destabilizing entire regions. A fragmented approach, with each country acting independently, will not be sufficient to confront this shared threat. Instead, a coordinated regional security strategy is needed, one that leverages the capabilities of neighboring countries, regional organizations, and the international community to combat extremism and restore stability. Regional military cooperation, particularly through the G5 Sahel Joint Force, has been one avenue for addressing cross-border security threats. This force, composed of soldiers from Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, Chad, and Mauritania, was established to combat terrorist groups operating in the region. While it has had some success in conducting joint military operations, the G5 Sahel has been hindered by a lack of funding, political instability, and the ongoing challenges of operating in an environment plagued by insecurity. Furthermore, the G5 Sahel's military focus does not address the broader socioeconomic factors driving radicalization, such as poverty, lack of education, and governance failures. A holistic regional strategy should therefore also focus on development, education, and governance reform, in addition to military efforts. Beyond military cooperation, regional political dialogue is essential for achieving lasting peace. The political instability in Burkina Faso is driven by a range of factors, including weak governance, corruption, and a lack of trust between the government and the population. As such, addressing the root causes of the crisis requires inclusive political dialogue that brings together all stakeholders, including the government, opposition parties, civil society organizations, and community leaders. The role of regional actors such as ECOWAS and the AU in facilitating this dialogue is critical. However, the success of such efforts will depend on the willingness of Burkina Faso's leaders, both civilian and military, to engage in genuine negotiations and make meaningful concessions for the benefit of the country's long-term stability. Furthermore, regional economic cooperation must be strengthened to promote development and reduce the vulnerabilities that fuel extremism. Burkina Faso, like many countries in the Sahel, faces significant economic challenges, including high levels of poverty, unemployment, and limited access to basic services. By fostering regional economic integration, neighboring countries can create opportunities for trade, job creation, and infrastructure development, which would help alleviate some of the socio-economic grievances that make communities more susceptible to radicalization. Investment in regional infrastructure, such as roads, electricity, and communication networks, would not only boost economic development, but also enhance security by facilitating the movement of people, goods, and aid, even in remote areas. In conclusion, while the international community has made important contributions to the peace and stability of Burkina Faso, more comprehensive and coordinated solutions are needed. Regional cooperation and political dialogue, alongside international support, are essential for addressing the root causes of instability and ensuring long-term peace in Burkina Faso and the wider Sahel region. This requires not only military and humanitarian efforts, but also a deep commitment to governance reform, economic development, and social cohesion. Ultimately, a truly sustainable peace can only be achieved when the people of Burkina Faso, with the support of the international and regional community, are able to build a stable, inclusive, and prosperous future. Burkina Faso, despite its ongoing crises, is a nation of remarkable resilience. The people of Burkina Faso have demonstrated an unwavering commitment to their country's future, even in the face of escalating violence, political instability, and widespread displacement. While the situation remains dire, there is hope that recovery is possible through a comprehensive, holistic approach that prioritizes effective governance, regional cooperation, humanitarian assistance, and long-term peace building. The path toward peace and recovery is complex and requires the active participation of both local and international stakeholders, as well as a clear vision for the future. One of the key pillars of Burkina Faso's recovery will be the restoration of effective governance. For any meaningful progress to be made, the government must regain the trust of the population, which has been severely eroded by years of instability, corruption, and military rule. This will require political reforms that create a more inclusive, transparent, and accountable government, one that reflects the needs and aspirations of all Burkinabe people, from urban centers to rural villages. A fundamental aspect of this is the strengthening of democratic institutions. The people of Burkina Faso deserve a government that listens to their concerns, addresses their grievances, and provides effective solutions to the pressing issues facing the country, especially security, food insecurity, and education. The re-establishment of the rule of law alongside the rebuilding of an independent judiciary will be crucial in restoring faith in the state. The legal system must not only hold perpetrators of violence and corruption accountable, but also ensure that human rights are respected. A commitment to justice and transparency can help heal the divisions that have deepened during the years of instability and military rule. Furthermore, the government must prioritize the decentralization of power, enabling local communities to have a greater say in decision-making processes. This approach can bridge the growing gap between the government and the population and improve the effectiveness of policies aimed at addressing local needs. A second crucial component for peace and recovery in Burkina Faso is regional cooperation. The security challenges facing the country are not isolated. They are part of a broader regional problem affecting several countries in the Sahel. Extremist groups operating across porous borders in the region contribute to a cycle of violence that destabilizes entire countries. Regional collaboration among Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and neighboring countries is essential for addressing the root causes of insecurity and fighting the transnational threat posed by armed extremist groups. This requires both military cooperation to tackle insurgent groups and political cooperation to address the broader social and economic factors that contribute to radicalization. Regional organizations, such as the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and the African Union, AU, have a significant role to play in facilitating dialogue and supporting regional security efforts. However, regional collaboration cannot be limited to military interventions. It must also involve joint initiatives in areas like economic development, education, and the protection of human rights. Strengthening ties between regional governments can help create a shared strategy for stabilizing the Sahel, one that promotes peace, security, and sustainable development. Burkina Faso cannot overcome these challenges alone. It will need the active support and cooperation of its neighbors, as well as the international community. Humanitarian aid will continue to be a critical component in the immediate recovery phase. Millions of people have been displaced by the violence, and their basic needs for food, shelter, medical care, and protection must be met. The international community, including the United Nations, the World Food Programme, and various non-governmental organizations has provided essential assistance, but the scale of the crisis requires sustained support. However, humanitarian aid should not be viewed as a long-term solution. It must be part of a broader strategy to address the root causes of displacement and suffering. In addition to immediate relief, long-term investments in social infrastructure are necessary to ensure that the people of Burkina Faso have access to essential services, including healthcare, education, and clean water. These investments will not only improve the quality of life for displaced people and vulnerable communities, but also contribute to long-term stability by addressing some of the socio-economic factors that fuel extremism and conflict. The reconstruction of schools, hospitals, roads, and markets is essential to restoring a sense of normalcy and economic vitality to the country. By fostering economic opportunities and access to services, the government and its partners can help reintegrate displaced people and promote sustainable development. Peacebuilding will be a vital part of Burkina Faso's recovery. Long-term peacebuilding efforts must go beyond the cessation of hostilities and focus on fostering social cohesion and national reconciliation. The country's ethnic and religious diversity must be embraced and celebrated as a source of strength, not division. This process will involve the creation of inclusive national dialogues, where all communities, especially those that have felt marginalized or excluded, have a voice in shaping the country's future. An inclusive peace process will allow people to share their grievances, rebuild relationships, and find common ground. It will also help to address the social cleavages that extremist groups exploit to recruit new members. Reconciliation must also include a focus on the rehabilitation and reintegration of former combatants. Individuals who have been involved in extremist groups need support to reintegrate into society, particularly in terms of psychological care, education, and vocational training. It is crucial to provide alternatives to violence for those who have been radicalized, as this will be key to breaking the cycle of conflict. The government, in cooperation with international partners, must provide the resources needed to support these individuals and their communities, fostering an environment of trust and solidarity. In addition to political and social efforts, economic recovery is central to Burkina Faso's long-term stability. Economic growth can provide the necessary resources for the government to invest in essential services, create jobs, and reduce poverty. Agriculture, which remains the backbone of the country's economy, will need to be revitalized. Investments in agricultural infrastructure, irrigation, and crop diversification will be essential in addressing food insecurity and rebuilding livelihoods. Rural communities where much of the population lives should be prioritized in recovery plans as they have borne the brunt of the violence and displacement. The international community can play a critical role in this process, not only by providing humanitarian aid, but also by supporting development projects that create economic opportunities. Foreign direct investment in sectors such as agriculture, renewable energy, and infrastructure development can help create jobs and stimulate the economy. Moreover, debt relief for Burkina Faso would provide the government with the financial flexibility to invest in recovery efforts and social welfare programs without being burdened by unsustainable debt. Ultimately, the path toward peace and recovery in Burkina Faso will be long and difficult, but it is not impossible. The resilience of the Burkinabe people, combined with the support of regional and international partners, can help guide the country toward a brighter future. A multifaceted approach which includes strengthening governance, fostering regional cooperation, providing humanitarian aid, and promoting long-term peace-building efforts is essential. With sustained commitment, the people of Burkina Faso can rebuild their country, stabilize the region, and lay the foundation for lasting peace and prosperity.